Hi, everyone. My name is Professor Stephen Friedman, and this is the Way Forward podcast. So I'm very excited to talk to Naomi Titleman. Naomi is the editor of the best HR newsletter in Canada, is the founder and principal of Collaborativity Incorporated, and she is also the co-owner of Future Forward with Mark Edgar, also the podcast host of Foresight, co-host
Co-host.
with Mark
Yes.
Edgar. Naomi's expertise is in helping organizations make work better through forward-thinking people strategies. So I think I want to start there with you. How did you get involved in this madness of people?
Thank you for asking that question. So I went to undergrad at McGill University, did my BCom there, and something always pulled me in the direction of the OB, organizational behavior, group dynamics type of classes. And I really also liked psychology very much. And so when I graduated from McGill, I in fact went into IT consulting. Yes, I know, completely different. It was a really interesting time when one of my bigger clients was acquiring one of my smaller clients. And I was thinking to myself, like, this is all great, but how are they managing the people side of the business, right? Like, it's going to be completely different for these people who are going to go to a net new company tomorrow. Everything's going to change for them, and nobody's really talking about what the people implications are going to be. I went back and did my MBA, and while I was doing my MBA, I called my mentor and I said, I want to come back to Deloitte, which is where I was at the time, but I really am very passionate about the people side of the business. And he said, great, come back to Deloitte and you can join the human capital practice. So that's when I kind of had my first foray into being in the broad, the broad world of the people side of the business. And I really enjoyed my time in human capital, tackled lots of problems from communications to talent strategy, and everything in between. And then after I had my first child, I decided, being a road warrior in consulting was not for me anymore. And I went into HR.
I want to get right to an example of some of the one-liners that I hear about work flexibility. And I would love to get your take on each one of them.
Sure.
Okay. So these are like quotes from executives, from, senior management sitting in a room with me. We're talking about working from home, not working from home, work flexibility, whatever. And somebody says this, okay?
I'm
Ready?
ready.
If I allow employees to work from home, how will we know they're working? So let's start with that
Okay.
one.
Can you just hold on while I go get my soapbox for a second?
Okay, yeah.
Okay,
You just
just
go
hold
grab
on.
that.
So, how do you know they're working if they're sitting in front of you? Number one is my question. And number two, most of the work we do in this day and age is actually on the internet. So, if you really want to monitor people, which I highly do not recommend, you can actually do that because most of the work is done on the internet or on the intranet. How do you know they're working if they're in the office, unless honestly you're hovering over their computer watching them do their work? Is it working if you're standing by the water cooler exchanging, weekend plans with someone? Like, where do we define what work is and what isn't? And I always say,
Right.
if someone is finding the loophole to not work during their job when they're supposed to be working, I want them to do that at home so that they're not impacting other people around them who are walking by their computer and seeing them do these things, and that's really disengaging for the rest of the people. So there's that.
That's a good reason.
Yeah.
That's a good reason. I really love the beginning part, which is like, because we were ever on someone's shoulder 24/7.
And I have the same argument when
Never,
people say, you should be in the office 5 days a week, right? That's another one that I can't stand because are you really interacting with people on your team 5 days a week, 8 hours a day? Like, is that actually what you're doing all day, every day? I don't know. That means you don't have any team members who are in other functions. You don't have any team members who are in other cities or countries.
that's a good answer. This one is one I really hear a lot. If I let one department role person work
Yeah.
flexibly, I'm going to have to do it for everyone. Then what will I do? How on earth will I tell somebody whose job isn't amenable to working remotely that they can't work remotely, even though the person they know over in that other department gets to.
Right. So why don't we replace like get to work from home with get a really high bonus or salary, right? So why is hybrid working the thing that we're saying has to be equal across our entire organization? Before this became a really hot topic, before the pandemic, nobody cared where the tech developers were, right? In fact, they probably were not in our country. So now all of a sudden, we want to be equal across all people in the organization. And my response would be, that's great. If you want a job that's flexible, that is a career path conversation for someone. If they're in operations or if they're in on the assembly line and aspire to have a more work from home type of job, then go skill yourself in order to get into those jobs.
Listen, I hear you. And you can imagine that when I answer something like that, there can be
Yeah,
pushback
absolutely
to
there
that
is.
response, even though I think it is a great and empowering response. How have you dealt with pushback to that response?
So I think it's really important to take flexibility from a philosophical standpoint first before we go and talk about location flexibility, which is really what we're talking about. So there was a great article months ago about how Land O'Lakes, which is a heavy manufacturing company, em- embraces flexibility in all different definitions of that word. So their shift workers, they implemented, shift sharing and shift swapping and stuff like that, which showed even the frontline workers that we do embrace flexibility, even though it means different things to different parts of the organization, which I really, really love. It's not always flexibility on location, but if you employ a mindset of we want to be as empowering as possible for our workers to do their job from where and when makes the most sense, you start to come up with really creative, meaningful ways to show flexibility in your organization.
That is amazing. At some level, even a way forward, an idea, an application, a policy, a rule has to be rooted in some kind of reason.
Mhm.
And you're calling that reason a philosophical approach. Like, you're going to make a rule, you're going to make a policy, you're going to write something down that says this is the way we do our work. There's got to be a reason behind it.
I think the companies that do this well have super engaged employees, right? And so, if I'm being a cynic and saying, do I care if my people are engaged as long as they're doing their job? The answer is yes, because your top talent is going to leave if they don't feel engaged.
Right. If your people are working from home and saying, woo, now I get to, not work, your problems existed long
Yes,
before
absolutely. That's a performance
this
management
policy.
discussion, not a location discussion. People who want to game the system are going to figure out a way to game the system, whether you tell them they have to be in person 5 days a week or not. So, the question I like to ask leaders when they say, I want my people back in the office 5 days a week, is what are you missing by not having them in the office all of those days per week? I'm actually a very big believer in a hybrid approach. In person time matters. It matters for building connections. It matters for building relationships. It matters for the intangibles. But there's very little that you can say has to be in person 5 days a week in order to build those foundations.
Exactly. That in person all the time, 5 days a week. The options, it's like temperature. I always say it's like the options are not freezing cold or boiling
Right.
hot. There are things in the middle. And sometimes we're kind of a polarized society, especially these days, where we tend to look at things as either
Yeah.
or. Okay, so here's the next one. Okay. Stephen, we need to figure out a schedule so we have a balance of people working from home and from the
Yeah.
office. It should be half and half all the
Mm,
time. So if I give someone 2 days, the other person should have 2 days, and it's not so much equal as much as it's balanced in the
right.
office.
So this to me smells of using our real estate most effectively, right? And so that's one thing that, obviously organizations are grappling with, right? They have all this real estate and they need to fill it. But, where we want to get to is that managers and individuals understand intuitively when it's important to be in the office and when it's not. And so one of the dangers of doing that, like very strict, these 2 days, those 2 days, is that we're living in organizations that are very complex and very cross-functional. And so you may end up with your 2 days in the office when nobody on your team or nobody with whom you're working that day are in the office. So that defeats the entire purpose. I think a lot of companies have experimented. Some did experiment with anchor days, like everyone in the office on Thursdays, which at first I didn't love, but then I kind of understood that it is an anchor where you know everybody with whom you work in this city, right, in this location, are going to be in the office, and that does provide some value. But I like to see the sustainability of this play out with managers knowing how to have performance management conversations with their people, and people intuitively being adults and recognizing when it's important to be in person and when it's important to be heads down working from home. And the whole argument of like, well, what if they're walking their dog for 2 hours? So what? What if? We have to get much better at goal setting, expectation setting, accountability, and then who cares if someone's walking their dog for 2 hours as long as they're delivering what they
Yeah.
need to deliver.
I really find this refreshing to hear. There is another interesting part of that that I really love. If I'm going to have people choosing where they work, trusting people to make that choice is part of creating that fully grown adult who's able to say, I ought to be at work today because Naomi needs to work on X with
Yeah.
me. It's not just, hey, those people need to know when they need to be there, but they don't need to, but almost like anything else. We got to trust people to say, hey, you know what's best. Like, I don't know. You tell
Yeah.
me. Like a bit of that.
Yes, for
Yes.
sure. There's a big void around leadership development right now, like leadership development for this new age. And this is part of it, right? We need leaders who can have those conversations immediately with someone that says, hey, you know what? Your presence was really missed at that meeting yesterday. There was a lot of nuance that you didn't capture because you weren't there in person. How are we going to change things going forward? As opposed to, like, let's monitor badge swipes and make sure that people are badge swiping. Like, there's always ways to game the system.
You are warming my heart with the first part of what you just said. I can't even tell you. I'm actually emotional about it because
I'd give you a
no, I'm
tissue, but I
serious.
can't reach
No,
you.
no, it's okay. I
Okay,
have here because
perfect.
I've so much of what you just described is about caring about people.
Yeah, and that's what leaders get into leadership for. Leaders need to like people. And part of the issue is that leaders are promoted after being amazing individual contributors, and the only way to advance is to be a leader, and it's a completely different skill set than what they
For job.
had, right? So I think that's part of what we need to acknowledge. I haven't seen that nut cracked quite yet in terms of really developing leaders for the now. It's not about reading a bunch of books or listening to a bunch of podcasts, but
Yeah,
all of the stuff we're talking about has to do with leadership.
it does. It really
Yeah.
does. When I hear about the opportunity to be able to put trust in other people and have them do the right thing, this makes me really happy
Mhm.
because I think that that's a big part of leadership. So let me ask you, I want to go back to this one thing, real estate expenditure justification.
Yeah.
If we're concerned about the balance of the people in the building, isn't this at some level a very, you know, paradigm shifting, systemic way of rethinking what a workplace is?
Yeah, no, it for sure is. I do think we'll see some shifts now that I think like long-term leases are going to be coming up, but it's a great opportunity to rethink what is the role of the office, right? So if you think about it, if the office is really where we should have gathering, right? Because like what's the point of being in the office when you're all in individual cubicles on Zoom calls? I don't think anybody
Right.
wants that. So if it's the place where
No.
people gather, then how do we structure days in the office to do more of that?
So I was working for a municipality and they told me a story of like, so someone when he was driving by, a constituent lives in a community driving by the office and said, call up the mayor and says, how come I'm paying all these property taxes. How come your parking lot is basically empty on a weekday? And it's sort of, the first reaction, as you can imagine, it's like, oh my God, we got to have people in the office, quick, fill the parking lot, you know? And somebody really smart said to me, well, why don't we just like, I don't know, why don't we make the parking lot smaller and put a garden in the middle of the
Right.
parking lot?
Instead of pave
So,
paradise, put up a parking lot, we reverse that.
Yes, exactly. Isn't that a brilliant
It is a
idea?
brilliant idea.
What about this one? Okay.
Hmm.
Stephen, Naomi, it's not the same when you're remote as it is when you're looking at a person.
Yeah.
It's different.
Yeah, it is different. And that's why you should use your in-person time for the things I talked about and your remote time for other things. And what I will say is a combination of the two is often the hardest, right? So having, for
Right.
example, a hybrid meeting is very challenging. So if you know you're having a really important meeting with people who cannot physically be in the office, if they're in a different location, if they can't get to work that day, I would actually suggest doing it entirely online. So, yes, it is different. And that's why we need to think about what we're doing when we're in person versus what we're doing remotely. And so it's really important to think
Mm,
about the getting people together just as much as having real estate or office space or even the infrastructure you have, the technology tools that you have, all of that, they're all components of the employee experience and
it's all
it's
value.
all valuable tools to enable people to get their work done. So thinking about, the office as a tool that enables people to get the work done, if you don't have an office, what tool are you giving people to have that in-person foundational relationship building time together?
And like anything we know, if we put all the value in one place, like everything that's of value that happens in this building, we miss out on others.
We miss out on key talent segments that, again, either sit in different geographical locations or cannot physically get to the building. So, those are trade-offs, right? Like as soon as you say everyone
They
back
are.
in the office 5 days a week, you're alienating people who can't be, and you're also limiting your talent pool, right? So companies who mandate 5 days in the office are, I mean, if that's their choice, that's their choice, but they should be eyes wide open about those choices.
Right. Right. Obviously, there's jobs that simply can't be done remotely. Like if it's, for now at least, there's obvious ones, right? You drive an ambulance, whatever. Like there's things, obviously. Outside of those obvious ones, if you were to say, and I feel like you may have answered it already today, but what ought to drive your work from home decisions? What would you say is the thing?
I always recommend opting for the most amount of flexibility you can. And again, if you have flexibility as a philosophy and location flexibility is one of those pillars, then you approach it very differently than an all or nothing situation. The number of days in the office is only one of very many choices, very many strategic decisions you need to make. And that's why we advocate for treating hybrid working or work flexibility as a strategy and not a policy, right? So people have been very fixated on the number of days that people should come into the office.
What is
I
with
don't
this? What
know.
is
People
this?
want a magic answer. People are looking to the company next to them saying, everyone's doing it, so I should too, which is not true, by the way. The data is still showing that the number of paid days work from home has been flat since 2023. So, despite all of these headlines, those are glorified headlines that are not actually painting the full picture. You need to decide what makes sense for your organization and empower leaders to actually scale and sustain those decisions. And you do that not just by picking a number and telling people to suck it up, but really to build the
Right.
infrastructure around that. That includes technology tools. That includes having enough seats in the office. It includes how you design the space, right? Like, don't complain to your
Right.
recruitment team that they can't find your people fast enough with the hot skills you need if you're not broadening the talent pool to include more than just the people who are commutable distance to your office, right? So that's another strategic decision that needs to be made, including how you develop leaders to actually do that. And then even the middle part that we talk about, kind of the process and the policy, there's lots of processes around the policy that need to be, again, strategically decided in order to make this all come to life, including who's actually going to govern the fact that people are in the office 3 or 4 days a week, right? Is that HR?
Right.
You're going to layer this on
Right.
top of what they already have on their plate? And who's going to tell the person that they're fired if they don't come to the office 5 days a week, right? Like, what's the process guiding those decisions?
Those are tough
Yeah, but they're
questions,
important
but I love them.
before you dig your heels in and say, no, we're going to the office 5 days a week, you got to know the answers to all of those questions.
You do. The other thing you have to do is you have to be willing to be really flexible about the other things that are going to change
Yeah.
systemically, right? I think that's part of what you're
Yeah.
saying, right? Is that like if you're going to make those kinds of choices, but I mean, I got to tell you, like you, this oversimplification of something that is complex is
Yeah.
frustrating.
It really is.
This need to find the magic thing. Stop it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not when you look at the guiding metaphors we have for organizations, they tend to be things like machines. So the idea is like, you know, if you don't plan and control, it will turn into chaos and there'll be
Yeah.
dogs and cats. But if you approach it more like an organism, a concept I'm really interested in, emergence, that says if you give people the opportunity to make the right decision, lots of times they will.
Mhm.
And to your point earlier, there's going to be people who are going to make wrong decisions no matter what you
Yeah.
do.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not like slacking off at work started
Right.
now.
Exactly. Exactly. And really thinking about it as a part of a much bigger employee value proposition, right? So
Right.
unless you're paying at the very, very top, and even if you do, people will opt out, right? People will not want to work for you.
Of course.
There's other elements of the employee value proposition that you and how they connect with your value system and the mission that you have for your organization. If one of your key values is empowerment and you're not allowing people to make decisions about where they can do their best work, I mean, people say BS, right?
Do.
Yeah.
They do. And you know what's funny is the employment pool is becoming much more savvy to that,
Yeah.
young people, to, hey, don't tie me down. I want to be able to care for to do my side gig. Oh,
Gone are the days where, we all signed contracts when we first entered the working world that said you couldn't work for anybody else or do anything other than your job. Those days are gone because people
of
people
course.
aren't loyal to companies because they've been shown that companies are not loyal to them. So the more
Yes.
you can provide freedom and mitigate risk, the better, right?
We will never be that person.
No.
And I know you won't be, and I will never be that crotchety old, kids today that just don't have the same loyalty, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. And I've had that said to me before. And you know what? My response is maybe they're right and we were
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah, no, I agree. We have the tools at our disposal to be able to do both and, right? Like when you and I were coming through the ranks, we didn't have technology like we do today, and we weren't able to
No.
do two things. We weren't able to just put up a shingle and do coaching on the side, which a lot of people do now. So are you going to have a hard line and say you're not, you'll never be able to track it all anyway. Now, listen, I'm not a believer in, these stories that you hear of people being full-time employees at multiple organizations because they're fully remote. I'm not a big believer in
Well,
that.
that's just disingenuous, fraudulent.
Yeah. But, back to leadership and management, this falls on them, right? This falls on
Yes.
them to have a reasonability check that says, is this impeding my team from getting their work done or no? And there should be like no evidence of it impeding what you need to get done as a team.
So let me ask you this. I think this is a really important one, which what you just said just reminds me of this. Um, Nothing is a panacea. Extreme policy, just in case, I don't want anybody who's listening to think, so it's like all about this flexible and everything's, flying around and also totally flexible all the time. There are still real challenges that are associated with flexibility. Some of them, as you pointed out, and I think this is really insightful, are the same as we've always had.
Mhm.
Some of them are not. What would you say is like some really key challenges that we'll still have that we have to overcome that are unique to a flexible environment?
I'll flip it and just double down on the fact that we've never been very good at setting measurable goals and holding people accountable to them. And that has become evident with this work from home situation, right? So people, managers, leaders who have not been equipped to have real performance management conversations are now saying, I need them back in front of me because I don't believe that they're working. So I think we really need to develop leaders and managers. We need to develop our performance management frameworks to really have those conversations on a very regular basis. I think
Yeah.
that's what's become evident is that we've been really crappy at setting goals and holding people accountable to them. And a lot of our performance management conversations, I've been in a lot of them, at the end of the year come down to a lot of art and not a lot of science. So, there's a lot of roles that can't be measured dollar for dollar, but how
Yeah.
can you get to what good looks like for a role? What's expected of them?
Right. Right. I love this because I think what you're saying is that it's actually an opportunity for us to say, you know what? We've never been great at, as you just said, measuring and managing performance in an articulate way that is behavioral. And what this says is maybe makes us, shift and say, well, wait a second, am I just measuring, ticking the box of being in front of someone's
Yeah.
face? Wait a second. That's sort of how I've been measuring performance. Maybe I ought to think a little more
Yeah.
deeply about what performance is in this
Yeah.
job. Then I can use it for everything. I can use it for more in managing performance. I can use it for better job descriptions, better recruitment, better compensation, like all those things.
Yeah, for
Yes.
sure. And by the way, we haven't even said AI once in this conversation, which I'm shocked. But this is a great partnership with AI, right? Like test out your performance management assumptions, test out your frameworks, test out your processes and ask it, am I doing things that will enable better performance and enable people to correct and course correct before it's too late? Or am I just doing make work here?
Because otherwise you're just spinning your wheels.
Right.
I'm likely going to touch on this every episode for a while in the Way Forward podcast by thinking about human relationships. Human beings are social beings.
Hmm.
This is what we are. Performance management is a social endeavor. As you mentioned a few times today, leadership is a social endeavor. Making a philosophy work for people is a social endeavor. We know that building deep relationships is different and perhaps more difficult for some
Yeah.
remotely, if they have any elements of remote. What do they need to do intentionally to make it so that if they are meeting more frequently, how do they get deeper relationships? If they're used to, like, I don't know, shaking hands and
Yeah, I
backslapping
mean,
and
I
stuff.
think it's all about intentionality. I'll give you a couple of examples. I work entirely remotely most of the time. I've found lately, especially, that if I'm remote and doing, Zoom calls all day, every day, and not seeing people in person, I tend to get lonely. So what do? I get out in front of it and I make plans with people to get together for coffee, for lunch, whatever the case is, to prevent that from happening, right? Similarly, as you mentioned in my intro, I have a co-founder of our company, Future Forward. We get together maybe once every couple of months in person for a couple of hours. We meet wherever we can and we do a little bit of, get our to-do list done, but that's where the foundation is built so that when we are not together, the trust is there, the cadence is there, we're on the same page, right? So I think it's about being really intentional about making those in-person interactions happen and that you use them for the right thing. So my business partner and I, the other day, I said, should we talk about this when we meet? And we said, actually, no, let's save that for one of our Zoom conversations because that doesn't have to be vetted or fleshed out when we're in person. That in-person time is too valuable to do that. And part of what we do is we catch up about each other's lives. And that's what we do in person. So I guess a long-winded way of saying that acknowledging that in-person relationship building is important for humans.
Me
So
too.
doing that deliberately and not fooling yourself into thinking that you can get things done on an island solo heads down is really important. And that's what worries me about downturns and people and organizations pulling back on in-person time that was built deliberately to facilitate those connections.
I love that you're coming on the other side now, right? You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of like if I'm going, let's say I'm calling up my buddy, I'm like, okay, we're gonna meet for dinner tonight with the families and it's gonna be great, fabulous. And then he says to me, oh my God, this crazy thing happened today. And I might say to him, wait, let's talk about this is a good dinner conversation
Yeah.
topic.
You don't want to sit there at dinner just staring at each other and then eventually going to your
Right,
phones.
right. We're gonna run out of stuff, man. Right, and sort of half joking, but that's kind of what you're talking about. Intention is the word you used. That is the word.
Yeah.
That is it. You got to think intentionally about the relationships. I think what you're saying is it allows me to separate out which kinds of tasks, in this case, you're saying elements of relationship, are best suited for being in a room and which ones, can I get away with
Yeah.
not?
Yeah, totally.
What an important conversation to have. And it exercises a muscle, I
Yeah.
think. And that muscle is let's be intentional about all our
Yeah.
relationships.
Yeah. 100%. I was just at a big conference a couple of weeks ago, the Transform conference in Vegas.
I remember.
And the best part was running into people that I hadn't seen in 15 years in the hallway, right? And yes, meeting new people, but also seeing people I already know and having a drink with them, having a coffee with them. And yes, the content was great, but again, like the content
Mhm.
I could watch afterwards on replay. So I was really focused on seeing people who I either wanted to meet in person for the first time or, hadn't seen them in a long time and wanted to reconnect with them. So again, being intentional about how you spend your time when you're in person is really critical.
And you know what? This always seems to come up appropriately, bleeds into other elements of our relationships, like the idea that with business partnerships is a really great example.
Yeah.
It's a lot of intention. It's like we're going to deal with things that are challenging. We're going to deal with things that can be done with a little bit more, for lack of a better term, coldly. And we have these things that have to be done warmly.
Yeah. And, just because we can do things entirely remotely and virtually and digitally doesn't mean we have to now, right? That's what's very different about now times versus pandemic times. We proved during pandemic times that we can get work done fully remotely. That doesn't mean that that's the optimal way to get things done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. This is such an amazing part of the conversation. The big takeaways right now, I've got this philosophy. I love that. I love the idea that there are challenges on both sides. There are challenges with flexibility. There are challenges with not. There are challenges with face to face. There are challenges with in work. And the idea that there's got to be something behind driving that decision and that not everything has to be, equal.
Mhm.
I love this intention. This is so insightful. I think it'd be a very insightful for my students and to my other listeners. And Naomi, I think you just did such a great job of articulating it. This doing stuff on purpose. I really love this,
Yeah.
you know, and thinking about what's going to drive my business. And I think more and more people, as our generation moves up into senior management roles, we get this young generation coming up behind. As somebody who is fortunate to work with some of these young people, they want to know, sorry, you got this reason why I have to do it this way? Why?
Yeah, they are asking why. We didn't ask why as much when we were junior. No.
We were more yes sir, three bags
Right,
full,
exactly.
or we'll do what we're
Yeah.
told kind of thing. And in speaking about my students in particular, I really dislike when people talk about kids today and loyalty. I think they are so stupendous and fabulous. And I think we're in such good hands. And I think they're going to be better leaders maybe going forward because of these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, I hope
Because they're
so.
saying, hey, why do we have this office? Why are we doing it this
Yeah.
way? Well,
Yeah.
I hope so too.
Yeah, so I would say, just being curious, being agile and amenable to just learning as much as you can learn is just so critical. Like critical thinking and learning agility are the two skills that are going to be very much needed, right? Because HR might not look like HR in 5 years from now, and finance will definitely not look like finance in 5 years from now. The world is completely shifting right now. So, and we talk about how important change management is in our organizations. I mean, talk about change happening without any change management right now. Like look at our world,
Right.
right? So, again, I think we have to be very open and flexible to what does performance management look like? What does skills assessment look like? What does skill development look like? What does a job look like, right? Like all of those things are up for disruption.
Yes.
So right now we're in a situation where the technology is advancing way faster than we can keep up with in our organizations and within our schools, as you've seen, right? So, you know,
Yep.
things are going to look very different, and we don't know exactly how. We don't know what's going to be regulated and how. We don't know any of that yet. So,
What are your thoughts are regarding it makes me think like with obviously AI stuff, also with the stuff that we've been talking about, what are your thoughts about experimentation? Like, why don't we try this and then see how it goes and then check after? Like, 'cause I always think it's so
it
important,
really is. It
experimentation.
really is important. Long gone are the days of developing something in that room over there and then doing the great reveal, right? Like we've got to be more agile. We've got to test and learn and iterate. And again, those are skills that are not necessarily embedded in our roles and in our current talent pool in our organizations. Those are learned skills, and they can only be learned if we have psychological safety in our organizations where you actually can fail and not be, not be fired for it.
So I have my rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Okay, and I have to tell you, even before I dig into them, the idea of having a questions that have nothing to do with the podcast, I completely stole from you. So this is my adaptation of it. Okay,
Got it.
um, they're revealing, is what they are.
Okay.
Okay,
Don't ask me like one regret or like my biggest learning.
no,
Okay.
no, they're really good. You're gonna
Okay.
like them all. Okay, first one, you get to choose one superpower. Is it invisibility or flight?
Invisibility. I
Okay,
want to be a fly on many walls.
you want to listen in
Yeah.
and learn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love eavesdropping. It's my favorite thing. Okay, this one is really good. Okay,
Mhm.
time travel, future or past?
Hmm.
So it's a visit. You can come back.
To visit, I can come back. Oh, I don't know that I want to see the future. I'm being very pessimistic right now, which is not like me. Um, the past. I think the
Past is
past.
nice for a visit.
Yeah.
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 Okay, but now, so we change the question. What if you have to live there?
The past. Yeah.
Okay.
Like
Or back.
the 80s and 90s. Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I was thinking that.
Those were much simpler times. I would like to go back to a time where we didn't have all this technology. I really would. And where we had to
I
like
could
cross border shop and stuff like that. Might be heading there.
no
Yeah.
tariffs. Yeah. Uh, okay. Then the last one is the most important one,
Okay.
the most philosophically revealing.
Okay.
Okay. You
Yeah.
ready? Cake or pie?
Cake. Yeah. You?
Pie.
Really? What kind?
Yeah. I love them all. Really. But probably peach is the top of the
Hmm.
list. 'Cause you don't get it a lot. The Ontario peaches in the summertime. I make my own peach
Yeah.
pie. And it's evolved. Like my first five were horrible,
I'm gonna have
really
to
bad.
hit you up for a peach pie.
I'm into it.
Yeah. No, I like a
But
good, like, rich chocolate cake and a white on white cake.
a Loblaws cake. You know
Yeah.
what? This was a lot of fun. Did you
I
enjoy it?
did. Thank you for
Okay.
being such an awesome host. It's been great being on the
Thank you.
other side of the mic.
Okay, good. Thanks to everybody for listening, and thanks again to Naomi. And we'll
Pleasure.
see you next time on the Way Forward podcast. The Way Forward podcast is brought to you by Canada's #1 business school, the Schulich School of Business. See you soon.